You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 22nd of May 2025 on Monocle Radio.
Russian President Vladimir Putin visits freshly conquered territory, which was previously part of Russia anyway. The UK hands the Chagos Islands back to Mauritius, but who has attached the most strings to whom? And given that nation-states have fought over other energy sources, why not wind? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Caroline Frost and Stephen DL will discuss the day's big stories, and our weekly letter is from the birthplace of Hans Christian Andersen. There, you've got a whole show to guess. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I'm joined today by Caroline Frost, writer, journalist and broadcaster, and Stephen DL, Russia analyst and regular Monocle Radio contributor. Hello to you both.
Good evening.
Stephen, you have been to California, which we will not be discussing at any later point in the programme, so it's little help to us. But what were you doing there? Was it primarily to stare at large trees?
It was primarily to stare at large trees, the amazing redwood trees. It was my wife's idea initially, and I thought, well, OK, we'll go and look at the trees. And they are stunning. I was really awestruck by them. And you see these trees, some of which are 2,000 years old. What struck me about it as well is that Americans come here and we show them our cathedrals, which are 900 years, 1,000 years old. And I've never once heard an American say, but we have trees that are twice that age. And they do, and they don't seem to realise it. But the other thing, if I may very quickly say, is one of the best museums in the world. If anyone is in California, go to Santa Rosa and go and visit the Charles M. Schulz Museum, the creator of Peanuts and good old Charlie Brown. It is superb.
It has been my general observation, Stephen, that the Americans do a museum by and large very well, especially those attached to popular culture, because often you can find those museums tend to be a bit dull and fusty and curatorial, but they have captured something of the fun and the zest of the subject at hand.
I have indeed. I mean, I used to love Peanuts when I was a lad, and I think we spent about an hour in there. I could have spent longer, but we wanted to get on and do other things and go and see trees. And I don't think I stopped smiling or laughing the whole time I was there. It was that good.
I don't think that there's a wiser person on this earth than Snoopy. If in doubt, he does have a thought bubble, in fact, for every occasion, doesn't he?
He does.
Caroline, you, however, have been smiling and chuckling and grinning inanely for possibly different reasons.
Seeing pink. Yes, so I've been writing about psychedelics because there's a renewed interest in what they offer.
At least that's what you're telling the judge.
Apparently. Yes, in the interest of research. So I found myself in a posh hotel being invited to take part in an experiment that replicated the effects of hallucinogenic drugs. And what I can tell you, I did find one thing interesting. Fortunately, I mean, I'm not somebody who really takes more than half a sherry of a day. So this was a walk on the wild side. But what happened was that they flash lights at you and they play music in your ears. And then afterwards, they said, so what did you see? And I said, so much purple. And I assumed everybody was being given purple. It turned out that they were feeding everybody just completely plain white light, and you were making up the rest yourself. So I'm very suggestible, and obviously I like a bit of purple.
Okay, and we're now trapped in a radio studio with you for the next half an hour. Have you come?
You have got bunny ears on, haven't you? Just checking.
Have you come all the way back, or should we be bracing out?
Oh no, yes, I'm back. I mean, obviously, okay, I'm going to go and buy a purple cloak or something on the way home. But otherwise, I'm fine.
Listeners can ascribe any peculiar outburst, or should I say, unusually peculiar outbursts to some sort of flashback. We will start in Russia, however, specifically in Kursk Oblast, a portion of which Ukraine seized last August and held until reasonably recently, and which has now hosted a visit from Russian President Vladimir Putin, who met local authorities in the small town of Kurchatov and the nearby Kursk nuclear power plant. Putin appeared no more interested in various recent ceasefire proposals than previously, and indeed went out of his way to make undiplomatic remarks about Ukraine, which which he suggested was populated by neo-Nazis and idiots, which is arguably fine talk coming from someone waging a vainglorious war of conquest rooted in imperialist hubris. Stephen, do we know clearly what the deal presently is with Kursk? Ukraine says it still has some troops on Russian territory.
And as far as we know, that is the case. It's up. The Russians are playing up the idea that they have pushed all the Ukrainians back out of Kursk. I mean, it's been not quite a year now since Ukraine invaded Kursk. The Russians need to give good news to their population. I'm prepared to believe the Ukrainian side that they still may be holding on to a small territory. They will undoubtedly have to withdraw eventually. But it's interesting that the Russians have had to rely on North Korean troops to try and to win back their own territory. I'm going to sound like a real conspiracy theorist, though.
Oh, go on.
Well, I'm just wondering, actually, if it really was Putin who went there. Putin does have doubles. We know that, just as Stalin did. And getting that close to actual fighting is not Putin's style. Putin, like many dictators, is a coward. We saw that during the pandemic, when he hid himself away in the presidential dacha outside Moscow, had a tunnel built. Anyone who was going to go and see him had to quarantine for 2 weeks beforehand, and then as they went through the tunnel, they were sprayed with disinfectant. He once appeared to go and visit people suffering from COVID in a hospital, wearing something that looked like a cosmonaut suit, which the certain Western journalists then had great glee in pointing out was made in America anyway. But it's just it's not his style to do something that would take a risk. So I wonder if it was him. It may have been him, but even so, there's a photograph that CNN have published showing him looking rather bored, talking to local volunteers. But the more interesting is his attitude to a ceasefire or not, and which is clearly no. He's not gonna call for one.
I'm interested, as you say, about this photograph. I'm just looking at it, and he does look remarkably healthy for somebody whose reports, Mark Twain-like, were of his demise only 2-3 years ago, and everybody seized on a tremor in the leg, and he'd gone pale. I mean, have those rumours about Putin's personal welfare gone away?
They rise up from time to time. No one really knows. This is the problem. We really have gone back to Soviet times when Sovietologists, I'm old enough to have been one, would guess. You'd look at who was lined up next to whom on the mausoleum at the May Day parade or the 7th of November Revolution Day parade, and you were trying to pick up little clues for that. And we are back to that. And one of the crucial things is that Putin has given no clue as to who might take over from him as whenever he might go, which is deliberate to keep people guessing, to string people along, and so the rumours are bound to surface. But no one really knows because no one gets that close to him.
Caroline, he's trying to style this out as a victory, obviously, but how much of a victory is it when you have on home soil defeated a numerically inferior force with the assistance of North Korean cannon fodder?
Well, when you put it like that, I mean, he has pitched this from day one as a protection of Russian territory and a restoration of a wronged part of history that he's trying to single-handedly right, and it's the rest of Europe that are encroaching on that. I find the optics most powerful in all of this, because on the one hand you're hearing about a 3-hour conversation with Trump. I mean, goodness only what did that even sound like with the pair of them?
I'm guessing about 2 hours, 45 minutes of Trump to 15 minutes of Putin.
Well, I mean, we do know that Putin does at least listen to other people. I mean, it's always quite scary the more quiet he goes in those meetings. But on the one hand, that's happening, and we're hearing about these promises of a 30-day temporary ceasefire. And of course, Trump has got so much skin in the game now, so Trump's busy losing face. There's this extraordinary triangulation. You have Zelensky turning up. He's in a jacket, as you say, every day of the week. He's hardly ever in a suit, as we know. That caused him problems when he did actually go to the White House. But it does seem bizarre. There's sort of two battles being waged. There's the diplomatic battle for the world attention, who has actually got Trump's ear, and then you've got this business going on the ground. And the tragedy is, of course, is that this business on the ground is lives, is bereavement, is huge human cost. So, I mean, it's now 3 years? Just over 3 years, isn't it? And Trump, one of his campaign promises, we'll get on to some others, was I can end this war in a day. And instead, we're seeing Putin on the front line talking about, it's all okay. So I hear you. Yes, it's pathetic. But of course, there's nothing more frightening and dangerous than a pathetic person in retreat.
Just finally on this subject, Stephen, because depressingly, I suspect we will have ample opportunity to return to the subject. For all the talk about ceasefires and ideas for ceasefires that people have pitched in recent weeks in particular, does Putin actually seem interested in any of them? Because what is not clear to me, at least, that if you are Vladimir Putin right now, I don't see how a ceasefire or still less an actual end to the war really benefits him personally, which is, of course, what concerns him personally.
You're absolutely right that he doesn't want a ceasefire. He doesn't need a ceasefire. He has to keep showing his people that he started this war with good reasons because of all these neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and that he has to win. He has to have something which he can put across as some sort of victory. Now, if that is, as he's been saying to a number of people, including Donald Trump recently, that the 4 regions of which they partly occupy, two partly occupy, should all be given to Russia, plus Crimea, and that Ukraine would have no security guarantees, no chance ever of joining NATO, then all that does is set him up for a couple of years down the line then to take the rest of Ukraine, because that's his aim. You know, what people I think forget is what happened on the 24th of February and in the days following in 2022 when he started the invasion. They got pretty close to Kiev. You know, the idea was to take Kiev, to remove Zelensky, probably kill him, replace him with a pro-Moscow government, and take over the whole of Ukraine and recreate a sort of quasi-Russian Empire, Soviet Union. And that remains his goal. And if he turns around now and says, OK, well, we'll stop now, he risks losing face. And I said earlier, he doesn't have an obvious successor, but he does have a number of people around him who must be scratching their heads and thinking, you know, is the boss all there still? And, you know, we're getting close now to 1 million Russian soldiers have either died or been seriously wounded in this war. And he's got to try and persuade people that this is still worth doing. We're winning. We're going to win. So you're absolutely right. He's got no interest in a ceasefire at all.
Well, to Mauritius now, which following some last-ditch courtroom drama will take delivery of the Chagos Islands, except to the extent that it won't. Earlier today, UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer signed sovereignty of the shortly-to-be former British Indian Ocean Territory over to Mauritius, which in turn agrees to lease the biggest Chagos Island, Diego Garcia, back to the UK for 99 years so that it may continue to be used as a military base by the UK and its allies. Diego Garcia is, among much else, a significant US Air Force base from which combat sorties were launched over Iraq, Afghanistan and other theatres. Caroline, is this a big deal? The Conservative opposition parties in this country certainly are trying to make it a big deal, suggesting that Starmer has surrendered to Mauritius rather than reached what appears, as far as I can tell, to be a broadly mutually beneficial agreement?
Well, I think we're seeing another classic case study of the dryness of our current Prime Minister, with his legal brain and his dry as a bone way of communicating what he's come up with. People are mistaking that for not really knowing what's going on. I for one, we've sat here over the last 10 years of the chaos of populists who know how to communicate a message more effectively to the pages of the UK's right-wing press. Keir Starmer seems to be just getting on with business. It's almost a sort of FDR 1929, just buries himself in the basement of the White House and does one bit of policy after another and somehow saves the nation. And I'm holding strong to the fact that this is going to be the same for us. I mean, I have to admit, had anybody in this room heard of these islands before this week?
Yes.
Oh. Well, I'm well travelled, as you know. I used to live in Australia and I've travelled all around this part of the world. And I mean, yes, OK, I'm being facetious. I probably have heard of it, but I hadn't heard of its import. So it does make you wonder how many other little spots in the world are going to be the subject of headlines like this. I mean, I'm fully in favour of it. Keir Starmer has laid out his lawyer's brief, which is that without this legislation, the future of those islands would have been even more uncertain. Something had to give. And of course, it's probably no coincidence. It's geography. It's like bang in the middle of the Indian Ocean with China only a skip away. So, yes, I think he's done the right thing.
Well, one of the concerns, Stephen, of course, might have been that if it was all returned to Mauritius, then China might have put in a better offer to the Mauritians than the UK or the US could come up with. And there is, of course, the fact that the UK, I think, has been somewhat bounced into this. If the International Court of Justice had issued a legally binding agreement, which they seem poised to do, then the UK might have been in real trouble trying to forge any agreement. But one thing I am curious about is this is a lot of money. It's 100 million a year for 99 years, although Starmer insists through some mathematical chicanery that this will be a net investment of 3.4 billion, not the 10 billion it does appear to look like. But is this not a massive, massive investment in current conventional air power? I mean, nobody thinks we're still flying B-52s in 2124.
Well, I'm assuming that the airbase is crucial, and one of the reasons it's crucial is that it could then become a base for drone warfare, with long-distance drones. I mean, drones are proving to be crucial in the war in Ukraine. In terms of the money, one thing that I haven't seen answered yet, as you say, that in fact 101 million apparently they're going to pay a year. But if we're then leasing the airbase to the Americans, presumably we're going to get some of that back. We're not just giving them
one hopes
favor.
so.
So one would hope so. To be perfectly honest, the thing I found most amazing about this story when I heard about it this morning, and I had heard of the Chagos before, but it sort of
It
came up again. I thought, but
we made a whole show about it on the Foreign Desk years ago, an episode, Caroline, which has passed into legend because it was just one of those weeks where I'm not going to bore listeners with a story, still less subject myself to PTSD. Everything that could possibly have gone wrong that week. Oh, my Lord.
Please send me the link.
To me, the most fascinating point that came out of this was that you can get hold of a lawyer at 2:25 in the morning because there was a challenge by two Chagossian women who live in Britain who want to go back and live there. And they actually put a halt to the process because they got hold of an emergency lawyer at 2:25 this morning.
Have you never worked in a tabloid newsroom? Because that's when the lawyers come out. Is the injunction? That's the injunction witching hour normally.
I see. So that's just
they do exist.
Yeah.
Yes.
And at the hourly rate they charge, I bet they get out of bed.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. Yeah, but that amazed me. And anyway, it's that was this morning's story, and that's now pretty irrelevant because Starmer's gone on and said, yes, we're doing the deal. And the Chagossians apparently are not united anyway.
They are not. This was one thing I did discover during that dreadful, dreadful week all those years ago. To be clear, Caroline, I actually thought the show came up pretty well. It was just one of those ones where I remember talking to my then two colleagues at about 3:00 on the Friday afternoon. And of course, the Foreign Desk goes out at midday on a Saturday. And I do remember uttering the phrase, so to recap, we presently have nothing.
Which is probably how those poor ladies felt at about, 12:30 this afternoon.
Indeed. But I just want to pick up finally on this, Caroline, on the the culture war aspect of this, which has blown up in the UK and which doubtless the Tory and Reform tendency will draw out as long as they can. Is it just an emotional appeal to the idea that there's still, there was still this one island in the middle of nowhere with a Union Jack flying over it, and now we're down one more Union Jack?
I mean, the way you're saying that is in a sort of risible, aren't we ridiculous? But we know that those sentiments are very powerful and potent and generation defining in the UK. So even if it is that's the case, I don't think we can afford to just dismiss it, because we know that Nigel Farage, who obviously has popped out of his tortoise shell with words like surrender and all the
is
emotive
he actually
stuff.
in the country this week?
Well, I know where how are his constituents getting on? Anyway, for another time. So I think you could be right. Yes, it's merely that, and on the other hand, we know that there's no such thing as merely nationalistic patriotism in the UK anymore.
Indeed not. Well, to the United States now, the House of Representatives of which has passed, if by the slenderest possible margin, the immense tax and spending bill described by President Donald Trump with characteristic understatement as big and beautiful. The yeas outnumbered the nays by just a single vote, and the bill may yet get roughed up somewhat in the Senate, where several Republicans reportedly have ideas for tweaks, but a win is a win. Among the bill's provisions are, can we shock you, a lessening of the tax burden imposed upon America's rich, who did not appear to be struggling untowardly, but anyway. And among its effects, according to the Congressional Budget Office, will be a hiking of US national debt by another $2.3 trillion over the next decade. Stephen, Donald Trump has earlier today called this, and I quote, arguably the most significant legislation that will ever be signed in the history of our country. How much work do we think arguably is doing there?
I think quite a lot. I think that it could prove hugely significant, though, particularly for an awful lot of people who aren't so well off, because they're going to lose their Medicaid. He seems to be swapping that for their medical insurance for those who can't afford to pay the vast amounts of medical insurance. If you're in a job where you get tips, you won't be taxed on the tips. I don't think it's an equal balance. I think a lot of poor people are going to get poorer. Whether Trump cares about that, well, we don't really know. He claims to, but interestingly, if I can just refer back to California, we drove about 700 miles. We spent 4 days in San Francisco. I saw one banner for Trump. I know California is California, and it's not pro-Trump. But
fun pub quiz fact, actually, at the last presidential election, the state with the greatest number of Trump voters was, in fact, California.
That
because
would be,
it is
yes,
the biggest state.
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. But no, I mean, I think that anyone who is concerned about the welfare of ordinary Americans, i.e. not the super rich, does not see this as a big and beautiful bill. It's actually very worrying.
Caroline, the elimination of taxes on tips and, in some cases, on overtime are unsurprisingly popular. But is this a cost-free bone being thrown to the less well-off? I mean, at the risk of sounding cynical, people who are tipped in cash, I'm not convinced many of them were declaring it for tax purposes anyway. And according to statistics, quite well-sourced ones I found earlier, 40% of people who work in jobs where they depend even partially on tips don't make enough to pay federal taxes anyway.
Well, this is just a continuation of Trump's, almost miraculous sleight of hand, isn't it? Because what he's always been able to do is somehow align himself with the blue-collar workers of America. I'm going to drain the swamp. I'm going to be your man in Washington. I mean, this despite the gilt-edged elevators in his hotels, the fact that he courts millionaires, the fact that the richest man in the world is allowed to wear a T-shirt in the White House. All of these things. We know that Donald Trump is a walking contradiction. And yet he continues with this sort of mirage of I'm one of you. And so saying something like, no tips for you guys is, why would he change the record when it's worked so successfully for him in getting himself elected twice? I mean, yes, it's obviously completely ridiculous. And you only have to talk. I mean, for me, this is almost like, we were saying this outside, is like the nearest that the US may ever have to experiencing Brexit, where it's just this kind of big thing where the only people who actually benefit from it are the ones who saw it coming, have bet the other way and clean up. But for everybody else, I mean, this is the great thing. He's doing what he promised. And it's all a bit more sinister because Donald Trump version 2.0 does seem to be such a more efficient beast than the kind of performative, let's just give him lots of Diet Coke and he can be busy arguing with people on CNN, the first time around. That isn't the case this time, and it's beginning. And we've only got another 3 years to go.
Well, you can cling to the consolation that at least the British only voted for Brexit once. But just finally on this, Stephen, you mentioned earlier that you were old enough to remember old school Kremlin Kremlinology, like trying to figure out who was sitting 3 feet closer to the General Secretary than they were on May Day this time last year. Are you also old enough to remember when Republicans, because I'm pretty sure I remember this, used to care about the national debt? It's now running at around $36.2 trillion, which does sound to me like quite a lot of money. And this idea of Trump's will throw another $2.5 trillion on the heap.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I've seen in my lifetime is that the Republicans and Democrats are pretty well swapped places, and they now, I think, deserve their title. You know, Democrats tend to be democratic nowadays. They weren't always. But also, I mean, yes, because the extra trillions on the national debt, also because, of course, he's being the populist, playing to the audience, with rather like in this country with a certain Farage. That's too many mentions of Nigel Farage in this programme already.
Quota finished.
But you know, blaming everything on immigrants, and you know, he's going to pay $50 billion to put up another wall to keep the immigrants out, and sadly, this is a feature of our country, of America, of a number of countries. You know, immigrants are getting it in the neck. When, in fact, in most countries where there are significant numbers of immigrants, they actually make a huge contribution to the economy. And unfortunately, he's demonised them in America, and a lot of people seem to believe him.
It just seems so short-sighted, though, because if you decide to strike at the underbelly to the point where they have no meaningful subsistence and are forced to scratch around, I mean, where does this end? In evaporation. Then those people who currently aren't affected, the water will lap at their toes and they'll end up being the underbelly. I mean, this does not play out well long term.
Well, two exciting tidings now for listeners who had the Dutch-Belgian wind war on their 2025 bingo cards. While both countries have sensibly festooned their stretches of the North Sea with wind farms, the Dutch are reportedly stomping their clogs at Belgians stealing power from theirs. This occurs, it says here, because the Belgian turbines are generally southwest of the Dutch turbines, and the wind comes from that direction or something, whatever. The upshot of which is apparently that some Belgian wind farms are creaming up to 3% of their power from Dutch turbines. We are not aware, as of this broadcast, of the Royal Netherlands Air Force revving its F-35s with a view to extinguishing the Belgian wind farm menace, but there again, we didn't ask. Stephen, who would win a war out of Belgium and the Netherlands? I'm excited for this one.
Well, both. I'm going to be very serious then, take this as a serious question. I think as both these countries are members of NATO and they tend to have sensible people, I think they'd sit around the table rather than firing at each other and possibly work something out. It's a bizarre story. I don't know a great deal about wind farms. I've seen them in seas and in fields and whatever, and think, well, they're not the prettiest things, but if they're, if it's good for the planet, I would never have imagined that such a row could arise.
See, I don't mind a wind farm as a spectacle. We may differ on that. One of the first assignments I ever did for Monocle magazine was to visit a wind turbine blade manufacturer in a small town in Denmark, where they told me, I did not know this, Caroline, that the 3 blades is entirely an aesthetic thing. It had just been decided that more or less would look weird, so that's why they all have 3 blades.
Oh, how lovely.
But is there the makings, possibly, just possibly, this may be a reach, of a serious issue here, because I learned today the wake from a wind farm can apparently be detected and felt and effective 10 kilometres.
Do you mean the wind shadow?
The wind shadow is the key phrase.
Yes, we've all learned something today.
We've all been doing our research. This is nice. And that does take wind away from those wind farms in the wind shadow.
I mean, it's sad, isn't it, that everything's commodified in 2025. I mean, I always would have thought, and perhaps naively as I've learned today, that the wind was a bottomless well, but here we are. Yes, so this wind shadow is the problem. And as I'm going to try and pronounce this gentleman's name correctly, Verzijlberg. He represents the Dutch interests in this. And he's saying that they don't want a race to the water where whoever builds first gets the most favourable wind. I mean, it's your classic towels on deck chairs, isn't it? But this is I think that's exactly what's going to happen if this 10-kilometre at least wind shadow is in play, and you've got an absolute case study here of the Belgians apparently nicking because of the position of those wind turbines, then that's exactly what's going to happen. Why would you put yourself anywhere else?
But it's also geography. I mean, it just happens where, Belgium lies,
the southwest wind.
Lies.
Yeah.
But, so, I think it's a little unfair of the Dutch to sort of blame the Belgians. Why are you there? Well, because that's where our coastline is. I think that's a good enough reason for putting up wind farms.
I mean, it's obviously going to be. It's kind of relatively early days in the wind era compared with nuclear power and oil and all of these things. I mean, it's pretty new technology, and perhaps legislation and international collaboration just needs to play catch up for a bit.
I mean, possibly it does, but I do want to close, Stephen, on a hopefully optimistic note here, because a potted theory I have is that hopefully clean energy, while being a good thing in itself, might actually promote cleaner geopolitics, because obviously countries, nation states, people within nation states have fought wars over resources for as long as people have needed resources. But I just keep thinking anybody would feel mildly ridiculous issuing the order to bomb a wind farm. And you would just get, even if they gave the order, I like to think you would just get pilots going, what are we doing?
I think you're right. I mean, I think this one will, forgive the pun, blow over. And
you worked on that all afternoon, didn't you?
No, it just occurred to me now, actually. But I really can't see this being a huge diplomatic incident between these two countries. They have had their spats over the years, and I remember being in Amsterdam a couple of years ago and being told by a Dutch person that the phrase "to go Dutch" comes about because the Dutch are mean. That was a Dutch person who told me that. And that's what the Belgians tend to think of the Dutch as well. But they are where they are geographically, and therefore the wind farms are going to be where they are. And maybe the Dutch can push them theirs further out into the North Sea.
This is how it starts, Stephen. This is how it starts.
Also, I mean, isn't the whole point of going Dutch is that it's neither mean nor generous? It's in between.
Well, that's the Dutchman said, never ask a Dutchman to pay your bill, but, go Dutch, because I'll pay for mine and you pay for yours. So they saw that as being rather mean.
Any Dutch listeners could address their complaints. We prefer it to Stephen DL personally rather than Monocle Radio as an institution. Caroline Frost and Stephen DL, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, our regular letter is from Michael Booth in Odense.
If an alien were to look at a map of Denmark, they'd probably assume Odense was the capital, not Copenhagen. It's pretty much plumb centre of the country, halfway between the easternmost and westernmost points. It's also older than Copenhagen, a Viking city. You can see the bones of the last Viking king, Canute, the man who raided my home county of Sussex, in the cathedral close to the spot where he was murdered. For this Englishman, it made quite a schadenfreude-filled pilgrimage destination, actually. But Odense has never been the capital. The truth is, it's always been a bit of a backwater. For much of the past 50 years or so, it's been a bit of a dump. There's even a saying in Danish which roughly translates to, it's all gone a bit Odense, which kind of means something like things have ground to a halt, plans have stagnated. Or at least that used to be the story once upon a time. I spent yesterday walking around the completely transformed city centre with an architect from City Hall. The story she told me was one of bad politicians and good politicians, sceptical locals and great architects. It's a story about what can be achieved in unloved city centres with visionary planning and, it has to be said, lots of cash. The problems for Odense started in the 60s. Denmark's post-war prosperity brought cars, lots of them, lots of congestion. The politicians in Odense decided the solution was to build a road, a bloody big, wide, busy road, right through the city centre, literally cutting Odense in half. And the city never really recovered. Walking around in the spring sunshine yesterday, I could find no trace of this terrible highway or all the car parks that used to litter the city centre. I couldn't even figure out where the road once was. You're standing on it, the architect laughed, and led me down a spiral staircase to a vast underground car park with a pedestrian-friendly, very slow road running through it. So cars have been removed entirely from the city centre, and where that road was are now elegant apartment buildings, lovely urban parks and squares, schools, businesses. I've never seen so many businesses in Odense, in fact. And that's interesting because back when the plans for Odense's city centre transformation were first unveiled, There was quite some argy-bargy at the public meetings. A political party was formed explicitly to block the plans. As you can imagine, some of the opposition was from local businesses, with that familiar concern: if people can't drive into town, they'll all go to the retail parks outside of the city. But the party didn't get many votes, and today the city appears to be thriving. Odense's an international robotics hub, among other things, and Novo Nordisk is about to build a new factory close by. So zealous was the drive to remove four-wheeled vehicles from the centre of town that they even built a refuse system which works like a giant vacuum cleaner. My architect friend pointed out where you drop your rubbish in what looked like park bins, but beneath which are huge trash cans connected by pipes to the edge of the city. No rubbish trucks needed. Odense's blossoming is also a story of the power of culture. This has always been Hans Christian Andersen's city, but in truth the locals were a bit sick of everyone going on about the Victorian fairy tale writer. His birthplace museum was the only reason foreigners ever visited, usually in coaches on their way to Aarhus. But today, the heart of the city, the crown jewel of the regeneration, is the new Hans Christian Andersen Museum, designed by the Japanese studio of Kengo Kuma. It's subterranean with a park on top, which is open to all for free, and it melds perfectly with the new centre. The tram runs through it. In fact, its tracks concealed by grass. So now I kind of think of Odense as a living fairy story. An ancient citadel, once divided by a smoke-breathing monster, its two halves reunited by culture, beauty, nature, and smart city planners. Happily, it's all gone a bit Odense. For Monocle in Odense, Denmark, I'm Michael Booth.
Thank you, Michael. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Caroline Frost and Stephen DL. Today's show was produced by Tom Webb and Hassan Anderson and researched by Francesca Jilks. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu, with editing assistance by Elliot Greenfield. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.